Hello everyone! This video is going to be a technical explanation of how animation is made, using my own short film Toho I recently published. If you're at all interested in original animation, please check that video out as it took a very long time to make. I'm happy with all the positive reception it's been getting, and I couldn't be any happier with how it turned out. But to the point, if you're looking for an in-depth guide into the principles of animation, this won't be it. What I'll be doing today is walking through the animation pipeline from start to finish, going over my work process and what programs I use. Okay, so the first and most important step to an art piece is getting inspired. To do this, I use Pinterest to gather both style and environment references. Because I wanted my story to be set in the forest, I spent a lot of time collecting a sizable amount of old-growth forest pictures. I then did the same thing for drawing styles for both the backgrounds and characters. I went back and forth between how much detail the background should have, but eventually I found something I could manage that still looked authentic. Because I would be, animating the characters, which involves drawing them hundreds of times over, I searched for an art style that was simple and easy to draw. After the referencing stage comes the concepting stage. Concepting includes figuring out what the characters should look like or wear, what the buildings should look like, how all the foliage and organic elements should look, and the overall color palette. After this, I moved on to storyboarding. This step took an enormous amount of time for me, as I'm not great at boarding in general, and I don't know how to draw particularly fast. Storyboards can vary in detail. The essential function, though, is that they convey the emotion of a scene and get across the timing and pacing. They are the first look at how the story might appear when it's finished. For Toho, I simply used Photoshop to draw the sketches and timed them out in Adobe Premiere. A better way to do this would have been to use Harmony Storyboard Pro, which is how it's done in the professional industry. But I'm lazy and I didn't want to learn how to use a new program. As you can see, my boards are very sketchy and not exactly literal, and I use a few frames just to get across the key frames and key poses. After the boards are complete, the work that you choose to do first can be a little more up to preference. The character animation and background art can both be completed in any order. In a studio production, these jobs would obviously go to different people who would then accomplish it simultaneously, but for a solo project you have the freedom to choose. I went with backgrounds first as it's far more manageable and easier to get into than animating. Now is also a good time to mention that I was using Microsoft Excel and Google Docs to keep track of what tasks I needed to complete for each shot. Toho had around 20 different shots, so you can imagine that without a way to keep track of all the work you have to do on every shot, it can quickly become an incomprehensible mess. Also, before you get started doing anything on a project, it's probably a good idea to have a well-organized file structure, something that's consistent between each and every scene. That way navigating your project doesn't become a nightmare as well. Anyway, for backgrounds, I simply used Adobe Photoshop. Other programs such as Procreate would have been just as good. While the backgrounds might look complicated, rendering them was actually fairly easy. The goal of digital illustration is to achieve as much non-destructive editing as possible. What this means is working in layers. Creating an environmental illustration like this is as easy as first doing the lines, then the flat color, then adding textures, then some shading, then lights, and that's about it. Using this simple order of operations, you can quickly create seemingly very complicated illustrations. I also made sure to create the backgrounds in pieces, separating the foreground, midground, and background sections. This will be very important later. After I completed an illustration, I imported it into Adobe After Effects. After Effects is where everything will be composited, including the character animation. If you are dealing with a panning shot like this one, you can achieve a pseudo 3D look by keyframing the different pieces to move at slightly offset times. In this case, the foreground will move the most, while the midground and background will move the least. This is much of the basis for what makes 2D backgrounds feel alive and immersive, and not just a flat backdrop for the characters to be pressed up against. And of course, the most tedious part of animation, the animating. I use Toon Boom Harmony for this project, as it's what I've the most experience with, but programs such as Adobe Animate and Clip Studio Paint would work well too. Regardless of what program you use, the process is basically the same. I first begin with a basic sketch that gets across the motion of the shot, and then after that, I draw the final line work using the pencil tool. After the line work is complete, the colors must be filled in. I simply use the lasso tool to select the line work, copy and paste it to the color layer, and use the paint bucket tool to fill in the lines with the desired color. Then once all the color is added, I create a mask by duplicating all of the layers, and then, honestly, I don't understand how it works in Toon Boom. The node editing tool is super uber complicated, and I don't even get how it works. I just looked up a tutorial and copied that. But anyway, after the mask is created, I draw the shadow with a dark blue color set to multiply. So at this point you have sketched the animation out, drawn the lines for the animation, filled the color in, and drawn in the shadows. I hope you can see why animation takes so damn long. Anyway, all that's left to complete a shot is to export the animation from Toon Boom as an image sequence into After Effects. After importing the animation into After Effects, the next step is adding light and shadow gradients. This is very unnecessary and is very time consuming, but I felt it added an extra dimension that enhanced it in some way. To do this, I auto-traced the animation layer, then created a color solid, yellow for light and blue for shadow, then pasted the auto-traced mask onto the light and shadow layers. This way, the gradients would be masked to the animation and wouldn't touch the background. I simply changed the layer blending effects, multiplier or linear burn for the shadows, and overlay for the lights. And that's basically it. As for other compositing effects, I would also add a Gaussian blur to the backgrounds and areas just to make the characters pop a little more, and add further dimension. Once the shot is completed, I then exported the clip and put it into a master Premiere file. And then once every shot was completed, I added music and sound effects to make the video really come to life. For music, I searched for suitable tracks from DeWolf, but now that I know their content isn't copyright free, I probably won't ever use them again. For sound effects, I searched on freesound.com and YouTube. And well, that's about it. I'm certain that my process isn't the only way to do things, and many other artists have their own personal methods and suggestions that I don't. But this is just my way of doing things. If you have any questions, feel free to ask in the comments below. If you're interested in more beginner or in-depth guides into using Photoshop, After Effects, or Toon Boom, just please ask. There's a lot to cover with each program, and they're all very deep and can do a surprising amount. Anyway, thanks for watching.